Hello everyone, this is Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder optimization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you so much for your continued support. This video is part 3 of my Blaster Caster series. Part 1, linked above, is where I introduce the ways I like to evaluate various Blaster Casters. Part 2 is where I use that rubric that I developed to evaluate 11 different Blaster Casters and explain which one I think is the best. Now, a small clarification for that video, at that time I had decided that the Wrath Runelord Wizard is the best blaster. Since then, they have received a nerf in the form of errata. So now I consider them, say, the third best blaster. I will probably have to go back and rescore them at some point, but I don't think they're bad by any measure. They're still one of the best blasters, right up there with the Animist, the Silence and Smell Witch, the Elemental Sorcerer, and so on. And there was a kind of part 2.5 where I talked about blaster tactics. That video is linked above too. These tactics are sort of fundamental to how you play any of these characters that we're building. So I would recommend checking out parts 1, 2, and the tactics video before watching through this video, where I am going to present what I consider some of the good blaster builds in this. If you want to just play a blaster, you could pick up any of these characters, perhaps with some slight modifications, and just bring it to your table. And for any level range, 1 till 20, you'll have a good blasting-focused damage dealer. This video does not exhaustively cover every blaster caster that I covered in the previous one. There were 11 different characters I evaluated there. I'm only presenting 3. If you like this video and you want to see more builds in the future, whether for the other blasters or for something else entirely, make sure to leave a comment, make sure to like the video. Try to let me know that this is the sort of content that you like, and if you do, then I'll make sure to make as much of it as I can. All that being said, let's get into the builds. The first character concept we'll be talking about is the Elemental Bloodline Sorcerer, specifically with the metal element. Let's first talk about the baseline choices. These are all of the choices you make at level 1 that define how your character is going to evolve for the rest of the game. First, the ancestry. I went with Gnome because Gnomes have 3 ability boosts, one of which is Charisma, and their ability flaw is Strength, which you don't particularly care about. This means that right at level 1, you can get slightly ahead on the numbers in terms of how you diversify while still getting to maximize your key ability. So this is really powerful for a sorcerer. I went with the Fey Touched Heritage for 2 reasons. One, we're going to get an extra primal cantrip right at level 1, and that's really nice on a sorcerer because we're charisma based, so innate spells scale perfectly well for us even if they're offensive. The specific cantrip you choose does not really matter as long as in the 6 cantrips you have as a sorcerer plus gnome, you are covering AC, Fortitude, Reflex, and a little bit of utility or defense. The other reason I chose Fey Touched is because this is going to unlock access to feats we like, and I'll talk about that later on. This is also a good time to mention that when I present an ancestry, or really any combination of choices in this video, I am not claiming that this is the one and only superior optimal choice for this character. I am not claiming Gnome is the one way to build a sorcerer, nor am I claiming other ways are automatically bad. The truth is, in Pathfinder, especially now that we have the alternative ability boost rule, you can take any ancestry and make it work with any class. Now, that's not to say some ancestries don't have specific synergies with specific classes, but even then, most classes have 4 or 5 different ancestries they can kind of pick a powerful synergy with. You will often find in online discourse that when someone presents a build with a specific ancestry choice, they are implying or even sometimes explicitly saying that that is the one and only true optimum choice that you can make for this character and anything else is bad and going to underperform. That's usually hyperbole. You don't need to worry about that too much. So if you take everything I said about this character but don't make it a gnome, you'll just end up making a few adjustments and still have a very good character. Off the top of my head, I can think of humans, elves, and goblins on this Elemental Sorcerer build that I can justify as being as powerful as what I'm doing with this gnome, just in different ways with different combinations of options. So keep that in mind when I present an ancestry choice. I am presenting one optimal combination of options. For our first level ancestry feat, I went with Animal Accomplice. This gives you a familiar And normally I recommend using familiars as scouts because that can help you do pre-combat recall knowledge or spot ambushes before they're sprung. In this case, the familiar is really just a utility battery. I chose the abilities Threat Display and Familiar's Focus on this. Familiar's Focus just gives us a once per day extra focus point. It's a nice way to get a little bit of extra punch when needed. Threat Display is so that we don't have to take the Intimidating Glare skill feat. As before, you don't have to make this choice on this specific ancestry. It's just one specific combination of options where I felt like, yeah, I'm able to make use of everything I have. If you don't want to take Animal Accomplice, you don't want to manage a familiar, that's fine. You just take Intimidating Glare somewhere else. For example, you could get Intimidating Glare from the Warrior background, so you could still have it right at level 1. But for the background, we chose Barkeep, and this is one of the reasons I chose Threat Display on the Animal Accomplice. Even though Warrior would give you the better skill feat, Intimidating Glare, Barkeep ultimately gives us better ability boost and helps us maximize our armor class, which I'll get into soon. The skill feat you get from Barkeep, Hobnobbler, is not bad either. It's a good utility option, so it's not going to hurt you one way or another. For ability boosts, first, we maximize Charisma, obviously, since we're a sorcerer. The next stat we maximize, as high as we can get it, is Dexterity. This is so that even without armor proficiency, we still have a functional armor class. At level 1, this would leave us 2 points behind somebody in light or medium armor, although we can use, say, a Wand of Mystic Armor to patch up that weakness and be just 1 point behind. And then at higher levels, we can increase our Dexterity and catch up naturally, even though Mystic Armor has fallen off. Then Con and Int are my next 2 choices. +2 Con for HP purposes, because Elemental Sorcerers like being 30 feet away from combat, which is quite dangerous, so it's good to have HP. And then Intelligence, because I find that at level 1, if I'm building a Sorcerer, I'm a little starved for skills. Sorcerers have 2 mandatory skills from their bloodline, Nature and Intimidation in our case. Then they have 2 free choice skills, which we would presumably do something like Diplomacy and Deception or Diplomacy and Acrobatics. And then that's it. That's your 4 choices if you don't have some intelligence. And I like having 2 or 3 skills from the Charisma family of skills, as well as having something like Acrobatics or Stealth to make sure that I am not a really one-note character, especially for Acrobatics, because it has combat purpose and it helps you navigate terrain. So because of that, I like having that 1 Int. If you truly do want to dump Int, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can just have 1 Wisdom in its place. It's not gonna break your game. And finally, of course, for the class and subclass, we're going to be an Elemental Bloodline Sorcerer. Now let's start talking about the level up choices, the choices you will make throughout levels 2 to 20 for your character. Now, to be perfectly clear, I cannot give a level by level breakdown with each individual choice in detail. That'd be way too much for a video format, especially given that I'm hoping to cover tactics and spell selection as well. If you do want detailed breakdowns like that for each and every single level, I do have them in written form available to channel members only. At the time of the release of this video, there is a sorcerer guide for levels 1 to 9 in excruciating detail for every single level, including tactics for how to use those options that you have. There's also a witch guide for levels 1 to 3, or maybe a little higher if I have worked on it by this point. And there will be a third guide in the future. I might even add guides that I do not cover in this video, so you can keep an eye on those too. So if you're interested in those kinds of details, I hope you consider joining a channel membership. It's a small monthly fee to help directly support me and gain access to things that I don't think I could cover in a video format. What I'll be doing here instead is talking about key decision points, talking about what you should pick to make sure this build comes together, and anything I don't mention, you can assume that you have a lot of freedom of choice in that regard. I don't need you to pick every single skill feat, for example, to fit into this one specific game plan. You can just express your character's variety via those for the most part. So first, let's talk about class feats. First, at level 2, you will pick the Psychic Dedication. Now, the Psychic Dedication is known for being a powerful option for any intelligence or charisma-based caster, but I'll still explain why. 1, it'll give you an extra focus point right away at level 2, which is quite rare. Secondly, you can pick up an amped version of any cantrip that's available to Psychic Conscious Minds, and amped cantrips can be quite powerful. My recommendation for the Elemental Bloodline Sorcerer is Frostbite. And Frostbite is a powerful damaging spell that'll also give you temp HP if it damages an enemy. It also uses a saving throw, which means it'll not inflict multiple attack penalty on you, which allows you to use Elemental Toss and Frostbite in the same turn, assuming you're okay spending the focus points, and you would not have to worry about the multiple attack penalty. The temp HP is also nice for a spellcaster who likes to stand 30 feet away from the action, because that means an enemy who just strides over to you and attacks you twice isn't going to instantly threaten to down you. At level 4, I recommend picking Anoint Ally. It's currently going to do nothing. We're picking this purely for a combo in the future. Advanced Bloodline at level 6 will give you an extra focus point, and it'll give you the highly situational ability to get a burrow speed. This is very rarely going to come up, so you're rarely going to use this focus spell, but that's fine. It's okay for one of your focus spells to be situational if your other options are not, right? Then at level 8, you're going to pick Explosion of Power, and this is why Anoint Ally and this feat are bolded. Explosion of Power is a blood magic effect that says when you cast one of your sorcerer focus spells or you cast your bloodline granted spells, you create an emanation that'll deal 1d6 damage per rank of the spell you just cast. Now, in a vacuum, that's not that good because you don't want to be 5 feet away from your enemy casting spells as a 6 HP spellcaster, right? But Anoint Ally lets you spend one action to touch an ally and make them the originator of your bloodline effects. Touch a frontline ally and they can release this combo. Now, I will get into details about this specific combo later on in the tactics section, but I do recommend this as your class feat choice. Then, at later levels, you'll pick Signature Spell Expansion, which will just give you more room to fit all the signature spell variety you want, including a few teamwork options, and then later you'll take Blood Sovereignty, because that lets you use both Explosion of Power as well as the base blood magic for elemental sorcerers at the same time. For skill feats, I would say you should focus on all the intimidation upgrades. You don't need Intimidating Glare, but you still need something like Battle Cry, Terrifying Retreat, etc. But aside from those, pick whatever you like and whatever suits the campaign you're in. Skill feats are one of those places where optimization advice will often not be useful because I can talk all day about how powerful a certain skill feat is, like say Catfall or Nimble Landing. But if you're in a game where the party needs you to pick Quiet Allies or Inoculation, that's what you're going to do, and you know that better than I do. So aside from anything that upgrades Intimidation, pick whatever suits your character in your party for your campaign. For Ancestry feats, the one feat that I really recommend is Energize Font, and this is why we went with Fey Touched Gnome. Energize Font gives us yet another way of having an extra focus point. This means that as early as level 6, you have your baseline 3 focus points and 2 different once per day abilities between Familiar's Focus and Energize Font to let you regain a focus point if you're running low and you really need the ability to cast that Amped Frostbite or Elemental Toss at any given time. Once you pick up your focus trait magic item at level 10, you will have a third option to do so. So you will have a lot of focus points on top of your already big pool of spell slots, and you'll rarely find yourself running out of resources. Then for skills, Intimidation is of course something you have to increase at every choice you can make. At level 3 it becomes Expert, at level 7 it becomes Master, at level 15 it becomes Legendary. This is because you're going to be using Intimidation on enemies of your level or higher plenty of times, so it's a good idea to have it maximized so it succeeds and critically succeeds as frequently as possible. Aside from that, invest in Dex and Charisma skills as you like. Maybe you pick up Diplomacy and then you pick up the Bon Mot skill feat. Maybe you go to Expert in Stealth and pick up Quiet Allies so that the heavy armor character is not ruining all of your lives by getting detected when you're trying to stealth. You can invest in whatever you feel is useful for your party, for your campaign. And then for ability boosts, of course, you prioritize Charisma, and then Dex, Con, and Wiz, you try and get up for your defenses. Dex definitely needs to get to +4 by level 5, and then maybe +5 by level 15, though you don't have to do it. You can get away with being 1 behind on AC. Likewise, Con, it's a good idea to have it at least at +3 by the time you get to level 20, ideally +4. Similarly, Wisdom probably wants to be at least at +3 by level 20. Whatever room you have left, Intelligence is a good idea for your character because it's going to get you one more skill, one more skill. It'll mean that when you're at a higher level, you can pick something like athletics so that you're not just out of luck when you have to climb a surface. Or you might pick something like thievery to help your ally pick really difficult to pick locks. Whatever you pick for intelligence is just how you feel the need to diversify. Maybe you will end up picking all the charisma skills you didn't have at level 1, but make sure to get a little bit of intelligence along the way. It will be meaningfully useful for your character to do so. Now we'll be talking about spell selection and tactics for levels 1 to 2 for this character. I am splitting this into 3 different level ranges because tactics and spell selection do change pretty fundamentally depending on where in the game you are. First, for spell selection, note that anything that is highlighted red is something that is a forced choice from your bloodline, Electric Arc and Thunder Strike in this case. The remaining are things you can choose. Another note is that for cantrips, I've written down 5 selections. You do have the 6th choice from your heritage that I did not write down here. I'm assuming that that choice was Frostbite. So between Frostbite and these selections, you can target Reflex and Fortitude and AC. You have a couple different multi-target options. You have a long-range option, and you have defensive options. So it's a good variety of options. For your first rank spell, I'm suggesting you pick Thunderstrike, Dehydrate, Heal, and Horizon Thundersphere. This again gives you the ability to target Reflex, Fortitude, and AC. And heal is just there to be a good teammate, because when your team needs you to heal, it's a good idea that you heal them. Now, for tactics, we can start by talking about how your cantrips and your focus spell, with that one focus point you have at this stage, are going to cover you for blasting for the most part. When you see a bunch of mooks, you just slash and gust them. When you suspect that they have like 6 to 10 HP, it's just a good idea to slash and gust them. You don't really need to spend your spell slots trying to dehydrate them. When you see multiple elites, it's often good enough to electric arc them, hurt them both at the same time, and then perhaps elemental toss one of them whom your friends are choosing to attack. Likewise, Frostbite and electric arc is going to help you cover most level +1 or level +2 bosses. You're just going to poke them round after round. Frostbite is also going to give you some long range coverage so that you're not just forced to use a spell slot because enemies happen to be 90 feet away instead of, say, 35 or 40 feet away at the start of combat. Then there is your third action. A lot of the time, Demoralize will make for a good enough third action when you want it. Remember that Elemental Toss can't be your most reliable third action at this point because you just have one focus point. And once per day, at the cost of an action, you'll have a second focus point. Obviously, you can't use this every single turn of every single combat just yet. Glass Shield is just a defensive third action you will use when neither of the other two apply. And of course, remember that just striding into a better position is a very good use of your third action in a lot of cases. Finally, you have Rousing Splash, and that's mostly there for pre-buffing, either before combat or on turn 1 of a combat, which is gonna start slow because of, say, a really large battlefield or like your enemies needing their own setup time for something or the other. You just toss a defensive buff on someone in your team, including yourself. So that is how you'll be juggling your cantrips and your one focus point to get you through most encounters on a day. You really only need to use your slotted spells to beat down a dangerous boss on whom this is just not doing enough. Say if you fight a PL +2 boss and your cantrips are just not doing enough poke damage to progress the combat, or if you're seriously outnumbered and you really want to dehydrate a few enemies to try and tilt the combat. So Thunderstrike is mainly there to beat down a dangerous boss when you suspect Reflex may not be their highest defense. You will do a lot more damage with Thunderstrike than you will with any of your cantrips, but you can't be doing that very regularly. You have to be a little careful about when you do this. Heal is purely there as an emergency button, and this is something you need to talk to your team about. You are not a healer. You are a blaster. You came here with damage dealing being one of your primary goals. As a good teammate, you will still have heal because you're a spontaneous caster. So you can be a tertiary healer. You can heal your friends when it's really, really crucial for them to need a heal, but it's on the whole party to coordinate and make sure that that situation is not every second turn of every combat. If your melee allies are just running into melee and getting beat up because they have nothing resembling defense, they're not treating your heal like an emergency button, and that's a problem you need to solve with communication. Lastly, Dehydrate and Horizon Thundersphere are more situational than Thunderstrike. Dehydrate you will use when you suspect the boss's fortitude is lower than its reflex, which just happens a little less often on average, or when enemies are clumped up together and there's multiple of them, and you feel like this is a dangerous enough fight that you're not just going to use Electric Arc or Slashing Gust, as I talked about before. Horizon Thundersphere is actually an excellent damage dealing spell at this level range. It does a good amount of damage. It's an attack roll, which means it actually has Roller's Advantage, which is like a virtual +2 over any of your saving throw spells. And if you do it for 3 actions, it still deals half damage on a miss, which means it takes away the advantage of saving throw spells. So Horizon Thundersphere is an excellent spell, but it's situational because you need to use all 3 actions doing it, and you're never going to combine it with something like Demoralize or Elemental Toss because you're using 3 actions to make sure it's generating maximum value. In a pinch, you can use the 2-action version of Horizon Thundersphere. I just don't think it's going to do better than Thunderstrike in most cases. Finally, your Familiar is sitting on your shoulder, and it just helps you with focus points and Demoralize. It's there to make sure your Demoralize bypasses language barriers, and once per day you have the ability to use it to recharge your one and only focus point. Now, to talk about levels 3 to 8 for this sorcerer. First, for the spell selection. Spell selection is going to be more complex than it was in levels 1 to 2 because 1, you're not relying on cantrips that much anymore. 2, you have signature spells to worry about, and the way you utilize your signature spells is a good part of how to be an effective blaster. This is the rough guideline of how you select your spells. And to be clear, when I say something is in some rank, I don't necessarily mean you get to the level where that rank of spells becomes available and immediately select it left to right. Make some sensible decisions while leveling up to make sure you're always covering as many defenses as possible. You don't need to pick Brine Dragon's Bile right away when you reach level 3. You would probably pick it later on, and I'll talk about why soon. First, for your cantrips, is the same as at levels 1 to 2. You might also have spell hearts that make some other of these cantrips available to you. For example, you might pick up the shield cantrip via a spell heart and then not need glass shield anymore. So just retrain out of these at your own pace as you feel like it's necessary. For first rank spells, you have Thunderstrike and it has been signatured. Anything marked in green is a signature spell now. Thunderstrike is an amazing signature spell to have because it is already the best single target spell for a huge portion of the level range, and your Bloodline and your Sorcerer's Potency upgrade it significantly. As you level up, you will retrain out of some of the blasts you had at level 1, like Dehydrate and Horizon Thundersphere, and have reactions in here, say Lose the Path or Interposing Earth. And you might have some out-of-combat utility. I have talked about this before when I talk about evergreen spells not being the best options for your lowest ranks, because let's say you had a Fear here. You would never use it over one of your top 3 ranks of spell slots, and you would rarely ever have a situation where you run out of those top 3 ranks of spell slots and then consider using a Fear. That's why I like having reactions in here, because you can fit them into your action economy, or utility in here because you use that out of combat. For second rank, Resist Energy is mandatory. Acid Grip is a good spell to help break grabs and restraints on friends via the most reliable force movement in the game. Therefore, I would recommend it on any Arcane or Primal caster. And thankfully for blasters, Acid Grip is quite on theme, so I don't think it's too much of a cost to pick this for emergencies. Brine Dragon's Bile is, again, there as a way to take your second rank spell and efficiently make it do damage between your 4th rank spells and your focus spells and your 3rd rank spells. And finally, Floating Flame is there to be signatured so that you can have a powerful continuous damage reflex targeting spell to go with Thunderstrike, which is a one-shot reflex targeting spell. Both of these are excellent single target damage dealers. At 3rd rank, you have Lightning Bolt, which is often underrated, but it's a good AoE if you're not trying to treat it as an AoE first and foremost. Remember that when you use Lightning Bolt, it does about the same damage as a Thunderstrike. If you happen to hit a 2nd or 3rd enemy behind the 1st enemy you targeted, you're basically Thunderstriking 2 to 3 enemies. That's excellent. That is, in certain circumstances, better than a Fireball or a Cave Fangs. So Lightning Bolt has its uses. You may not use it as much as Cave Fangs, but you will use it. Cave Fangs, of course, is Fireball with difficult terrain attached. Just a great spell overall. If you don't want to deal with the difficult terrain, or if you just like having Fireball instead, Pick Fireball, no big deal. Dehydrate and Heal are there for the same reasons as they were on the previous slide, they've just been moved up to a more relevant rank. Finally, and 4th rank spells, Unfettered Movement is mandatory, and then Cinder Swarm and Rust Cloud again add a bit to your blasting capabilities. Cinder Swarm is an excellent single target blast that'll do about as much damage as Floating Flame, and Rust Cloud is there for zoning purposes. You'll be able to blast in an area, and then if you're in a coordinated party, they can keep enemies in that area and just you rack up damage turn after turn after turn. Airlift is not a blast, and if you don't want to pick it, you can pick something else that fits your character's theme better. I just like having utility options like Airlift, Acid Grip, etc. on my characters because I feel like I come across situations where our party feels out of place and then I airlift them into the right place, then everyone's really happy. And it's fairly on theme for a blaster caster to be able to do this, so I don't really mind picking it. But pick another blast in its place if you would prefer. Maybe a heightened Ignite Fireworks or Acid Grip or something else. You will notice that this spell list is quite reflex heavy, but I think that's fine because you have Dehydrate and Heal. Heal is a good AoE against Undead. Dehydrate is, at 3rd rank, a decent enough AoE against almost any creature, and it actually does excellent single target damage. You can use Dehydrate as a single target Fortitude targeting spell, and you'll feel fine about it. Rust Cloud also targets Fortitude, so if you're ever in a situation where the enemy has really high reflex, you can just toss up a Rust Cloud and ask your allies to help you keep the enemy in that Rust Cloud. Now for tactics, because they do change drastically as you get to this level range. First, you will notice that your cantrips, they have steadily started falling off. At level 3, you'll use them a little less than you used to. At level 5, you'll use them a lot less than you used to. By level 7, you might feel like they're just filler that you barely ever use. At this point, you should be using blasting spell slots more liberally. How to do so is honestly a huge, long, and extensive conversation. There's a reason I have entire different videos covering it. First, I would recommend checking the spell selection video, which I will link above, where I talk about the fundamentals of how you want to diversify the saving throws you target, and how you want to have a variety of different damage types and how to figure out which one to use. Then you should also check out my blasting tactics video, which I linked all the way back in the intro, where I talk more about blaster specific tactics, building off of those earlier fundamentals. That's where I talk about how AoE spells can help your party enable Focus Fire. It's where I talk about the difference of how you use a spell like Floating Flame or Lightning Bolt. It's where I talk about how Thunder Strike is really only meant to be used on bosses, and otherwise you should almost always end up using one of your other blasts that we've been talking about. Unfortunately, I can't get into the weeds of every single one of the things I just said. Those are just summaries, but I really recommend checking out those videos. This line over here is why I made the Blaster Tactics video, because otherwise I would have ended up making this video an hour and a half longer than it is to make sure I was discussing tactics properly. Now, another thing to note is that as you're leveling up, you may not have full saving throw coverage at all times if you just look at the list I gave you and just pick spells left to right, up to down. For example, I said Dehydrate and Heal are a way to target Fortitude at rank 3 and Rust Cloud at rank 4. That doesn't mean that at level 3, when you first pick your second rank spells, you just don't have Fortitude targeting spells. That's obviously a bad idea. So make sure you're using retrains sensibly. When you lose your first rank Dehydrate, make sure you replace it with a second rank Sudden Blight. Don't lose that second rank Sudden Blight until your third rank has Dehydrate and Heal, and so on and so forth. Next up, you have 3 focus points and 2 once per day ways of getting a 4th focus point. Use Elemental Toss liberally. This also affects how you use your spell slots. Remember how for my first rank spells I chose reactions? The whole reason for this is that between your many higher rank spell slots and the fact that you have wands and a staff probably, and the fact that you have 3 focus points and 2 once per day ways of getting a 4th focus point, when are you ever going to use a 2-action first rank spell? Almost never. So be liberal, be explosive with your resources. That's what makes a good blaster. If you play too conservatively, you will feel bad. Make sure that when Cave Fangs is good, you use Cave Fangs. When Cinder Swarm is good, you use Cinder Swarm. and combine all of that with trying to use your focus points turn after turn. At this point, Intimidation and your Psychic cantrip, say Amped Frostbite, are going to be how you round out your turns. You have 3 focus points, use them on Elemental Toss because that's the most efficient way of fitting it in with Thunderstrike or some other 2-action spell, but you will demoralize some of the time, especially once you get Battle Cry. You'll demoralize at the start of every combat and then maybe 1 action somewhere in the combat. Maybe some turns you'll go demoralize into Amped Frostbite instead of, say, Elemental Toss into a 2-action slotted spell. Don't rule out these options, just remember that Elemental Toss can be spammed now. And finally, we cannot talk about level 8 without talking about Anoint Ally and Explosion of Power. I mentioned the combo earlier. Here I wanted to talk a bit more about how you use it. Basically, you anoint an ally who likes being within 5 feet of your enemies, and basically that means that anytime you cast Elemental Toss or any of the spells that have highlighted red other than Electric Arc, you're gonna do a bunch of damage, 1d6 per spell rank. Additionally, and this is something a lot of GMs might consider cheesy, Anoint Ally does not have a usage limit or an immunity of any kind. You can use it outside of combat, and then a minute later you can use it again. So a lot of guides I've seen recommend that you just anoint allies, say, as your exploration activity, so that when combat starts, you don't even have to spend the action anointing your ally. If your GM allows this, that's great. It's gonna feel brokenly powerful. I have a feeling a lot of GMs will not be happy with this interaction, so make sure you talk with them and make sure they know that you're trying to use it outside of combat as an exploration activity, and if they're not okay with it, then just set it up at the start of combat. I also want to point out here that Explosion of Power cannot just be free damage for you. It often will be, and it's a lot of damage, but there's going to be cases where it doesn't work. Sometimes the enemy is more than 5 feet away from your friend when you cast your spell. Sometimes your friend wants to be more than 5 feet away from your enemy. Either they're perhaps using your reach weapon, or perhaps they're retreating out of combat, because I have talked about this before, where sometimes the best tactics are to slow down your game plan, to leave melee for a little bit. Sometimes your frontliners want to be adjacent to one another to perhaps make use of something like Shield Warden, or the Guardian class features, or that new archetype from Shining Kingdom. So Explosion of Power is not just a free 4d6 or 8d6 damage per turn, and then it's going to go up every 2 levels. It's going to be some extra damage, say on half of all your turns, and then on the other half, there's just going to be situations where it doesn't matter. Still a very powerful combo, but don't get carried away by how good it looks on paper. Remember to look at the realities of the combat you're in for your party composition based on how the situation is evolving. Now let's talk about levels 9 to 20 for this sorcerer. You'll notice that on the previous slide, I said that spell selection gets a little complex for the levels 3 to 8 range, because signature spells have to be chosen carefully, your retraining has to be done carefully. This is kind of the opposite. Because at higher levels you have so many signature spells, you're kind of going to feel spoiled for choice. You're going to have chosen all of the best blasts that you need and still have plenty of options left over. So let's go through what that looks like. Cantrips, as before, I have left it the same as it was at level 1, but really the cantrips you choose here are sort of a formality. You will rarely ever use them for damage. Maybe you'll use Needle Darts for triggering a weakness or something once in a while. Electric Arc might still come in handy. Maybe you have cut Slashing Gust for live wire. And of course, you have to consider that you'll have a lot of cantrips from your spell hearts, your staff, and from any random items you might be carrying, like how some items give you guidance or telekinetic hand. So your cantrip choices are really just pick what makes sense for your character, given what items they might already have. First rank, the spell choices have not changed much, but we have Heal as a signature spell now. Remember that I suggested choosing Signature Spell Expansion as a feat at the beginning of this build. This is the reason why. With Signature Spell Expansion, we're able to signature all of the spells that we would like, and that's amazing. With Signature Heal, we can make sure that whenever our party needs us to be, we can be the emergency healer. At second rank, we have kept Acid Grip from before, but we have replaced the offensive spells with Hidebound and some or the other utility. We can Signature Hidebound and Acid Grip because I think it makes a lot of sense to. One could argue that instead of Acid Grip, you should perhaps have signatured Brine Dragon Bile. I would still keep Acid Grip as a second rank spell in place of that utility in that case, but both options make sense. Hidebound is a fantastic reactive defense to use to protect yourself or your allies, and Acid Grip is of course an amazing spell as we talked about before. I dropped Floating Flame at this rank because Floating Flame is most of the time just going to be worse than Cinder Swarm. At the level 3 to 8 range, you still kept it because you only have so many 4th rank slots to use Cinder Swarm with. But now that you have 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th rank slots to use Cinder Swarm with, since it's a signature spell, you don't really need Floating Flame anymore. It's kind of redundant to have it. At 3rd rank, we have Earthbind for anti-flying utility, Wooden Double for defense, and again, whatever utility spell you want, out of combat, in combat, you can pick. Wooden Double is signatured at this level for the same reasons as Hidebound was at the previous rank. At 4th rank, we have done Airlift, Cinder Swarm, and Zephyr Slip. We cut Rust Cloud because its damage is not going to scale that well at this rank now, and we don't want to signature it, we want to signature Cinder Swarm. And Zephyr Slip just happens to be an incredibly powerful way to make sure that you don't get caught in a bad position. Enemies approach you, reposition yourself, get to a place that's better for you. Maybe you stay within 30 feet to still use Elemental Toss next turn, maybe you don't. You can make that pick as a reaction. It's really powerful. At 5th rank, we're forced to have Elemental Form, and Elemental Form is not gonna be that good a spell, especially because you can only choose the Metal Form, and this 5th rank, this is where we'll start to see a tactical shift in how we operate. I'll talk more about this on the next slide, and I do talk about it in my Blasting Tactics video. But now we're picking Corrosive Muck because it can do some repeated damage while also inflicting greater difficult terrain, and it doesn't need to heighten to do damage well, so we don't even need to signature it. We have Freezing Rain, which again can slow enemies and inflict a huge amount of difficult terrain, and we don't really care about the damage, so we don't need to signature it. And then we have Howling Blizzard. We have signatured this one. Because we have Howling Blizzard as a signature spell, we also dropped Cave Fangs from our earlier signature, and we cut Cave Fangs for Wooden Double. Same logic as how we dropped Floating Flame. We just have so many higher rank spell slots to use Howling Blizzard with that there's no real reason to use Cave Fangs. It might save you an action once in a while, but it's ultimately better to just have the flexibility over having the potential of using Cave Fangs more efficiently than Howling Blizzard. At 6th rank, we're forced to pick Chain Lightning, and that's not something anyone's ever going to complain about. We're going to signature that. And then we can pick Field of Razors, for many of the same reasons as we picked Corrosive Muck on the previous rank. We're going to use it for zoning plus damage. We also heighten Zephyr Slip to this rank because it will help us not only reposition ourselves, but also an adjacent ally some of the time, and then pick some or the other utility on your 6th rank. Again, the fact that we're choosing utility as our 6th rank options too should kind of tell you how much flexibility we already have. When you're at level 11 to 12, you obviously will not have a utility spell in your 6th rank. You might have a heightened version of some other blast or some other 6th rank spell you like, but once you level past it, you'll very quickly realize you don't need much in your 6th rank slots. At 7th rank, we're forced into Energy Aegis, and then we pick Eclipse Burst because it's a fantastic blast and we're going to signature it. We'll pick Haste because it's just a really good spell to have. I know it's a buff, not a blasting spell, but anytime you use it, you're just going to make all of the turns you take for the rest of combat way better. You might as well have it. And Fly, because sometimes you or a party member might need to fly. Eclipse Burst is a fantastically scaling blast, and is yet another reason why we ended up dropping Cave Fangs from earlier. Between Howling Blizzard and Freezing Rain and Corrosive Muck giving us a variety of options for difficult terrain while still being good blasts, and then Eclipse Burst having much higher damage numbers than a heightened Cave Fang or Howling Blizzard, we don't really need to talk about the 3rd rank blast anymore. We have kind of walked well past them. Again, if you like Fireball for being iconic, you can always just have a signatured Fireball in there. You're going to do fine with it. It's just, I feel like Fireball and Cave Fangs will have lost their value by this point. At 8th rank, we're forced to pick Earthquake, which is sometimes a good blast, but oftentimes it's not. And then past that, we'll pick Arctic Rift for being a fantastic blast with a good rider effect on failures and critical failures, as long as you're able to make sure you hit a reasonable number of targets with the line. Zephyr Slip, because again, an 8th rank Zephyr Slip lets us carry friends with us. And Whirlpool, because it gives us another bunch of damage plus zoning. At 9th rank, we're forced to pick Wrathful Storm, a decent blast to have once in a while. Falling Stars, one of the best blasts in the game for large battlefields. Implosion, a very powerful single target blast. And of course, Metamorphosis. We're picking Metamorphosis for the utility, not for any kind of offensive value. For example, it's just nice to have Metamorphosis if you really feel like you need to use Ferrous Form in a given situation to have its immunities. We signatured Implosion at this rank, but this is kind of a formality because it's almost never going to be worth it to use your one and only 10th rank slot on Implosion. You're just going to do something else with it and instead damage with your 9th rank slots. For 10th rank, I chose Manifestation, which is just going to let us cast any 9th or lower rank primal spell or any 7th or lower rank, any spell if we would like. So now let's talk about tactics. Remember that at these levels, a blaster's job is going to cross over a lot with debuffer and or controller. Think about when you should be applying zoning spells. Think about when popping up a corrosive muck or freezing rain on turn 1 is valuable enough to justify the action cost. Remember that there is a tempo cost to it. Instead of doing a huge blast up front, you are trying to zone out enemies. There are often going to be fights where this is a very useful thing to do, so you have to learn to identify those situations. Getting the action economy under control is often going to be a spellcaster's job at these high levels. All of your one-shot blasts have become signature spells or are coming from your focus spells. Those are the blasts that basically only generate value off of their damage, so you really want them heightened as flexibly as you can. Likewise for your reactive defenses, because a lot of them scale in the amount of damage they can block every couple ranks or so. So it's worth it to have them as signature spells. I will also say that a lot of the selections I made were made to be thematic as a blaster. You can consider swapping some of the selections I made for something else. At 6th rank, where I said you have Field of Wraithers, you might have Slow 6. At 5th rank, where I said Freezing Rain, you might have Wall of Stone. Ultimately, it's your choice how much you want to deviate from the blaster fantasy, but I wanted to present a viable spell list that is mostly, almost all the time, going to be blasting while still being a good member of the team. That's why I focus so much on blasts with riders that inflict debuffs and or zoning effects, because I wanted this character to feel more like a blaster and less like anything else. So the main tactical shift from levels 3 to 8 versus 9 to 20 is now you need to be thinking about the debuff riders and zoning effects of your spells and how to loop them in, how to justify the tempo cost, when it's not worth it and when you should go back to one-shot blasts. All of these considerations will make the turn-to-turn decision-making more complex, even though spell list selection got a lot easier in these higher levels. Don't forget, no matter how much you like to blast, you still need to be a good teammate. I will always say that you get about 90% of your character choices for purely your character concept, but you really should use that last 10% to continue being a good teammate. You have signature heal for a reason. Coordinate with your friends. When they need it, they need it. Use your own hidebounds to make sure they need it less whenever you can. You have plenty of utility options. You have Airlift, you have Zephyr Slip, you have 4 or 5 different out-of-combat utility spells from your own spell slots, and then a whole variety of them on scrolls and wands. And you have silver bullets like Acid Grip and Earthbind, helping you deal with situations that enemies might put your party in. Likewise, rank 7 Haste and Fly are really good teammate helping spells. The Haste will incidentally help you too, so you will feel really good about it, but ultimately you're picking it because it's a huge tempo shift for your whole party. And do not forget about staffs, wands, and scrolls. At these high levels, you have a lot of gold, and as a spellcaster, you may not always have the things to spend it on. A fully upgraded staff is really valuable on a spellcaster, especially on a primal spellcaster. You might have one of the high-level picks like a Staff of Water or a Staff of the Tempest, which have some really good spells you may want to consider. Wands might provide you with all-day buffs like 2nd rank Longstrider or 6th rank Elemental Sense, and these can repeatedly generate value throughout a day. And Scrolls will help you cover situations for spells you didn't pick in your spell list. I mentioned a few utility spells, but there's a lot of options out there. Water Breathing, Water Walking, Gecko Grip, Jump. There are so many spells you could be picking for utility, and having a couple scrolls of each of the lowest ranked ones is kind of free at these levels. So do not forget about those, because they can really help you be a good teammate and a participant in out-of-combat stuff whenever necessary. Sorry for the abrupt ending, everyone. This video was turning out way too long, approaching an hour and 40 minutes or so I was forced to splice it into 2 parts. The next part will come out very quickly. This one covered the sorcerer, the next one will cover the witch and the wizard. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this content and you'd like to see more builds in the future, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you can, please join a channel membership. It's a quick and ad-free way of directly supporting me, and it gives you access to detailed build guides, like, for example, the sorcerer that I just covered in this video. I have been Mathfinder, folks, and I'll see you next time.